Greetings, students, wherever you are and at whatever time you find yourself to be in. Today we want to continue to study syllogisms by considering what is known as mood and figure. Now remember, when we find a syllogism in the wild, it won't always be in standard form, or rather when we find an argument in the wild, it won't always be in standard form, and we'll need to put it in the form of a syllogism. So here's an argument that we've found, right? Since no horned animals are predators, and a moose is a horned animal, it follows that no moose are predators. But if we look at it, we see that that second statement is not in standard form, right? So we're going to have to rephrase it to be, since no horned animals are predators and all moose are horned animals, it follows that no moose are predators. If we then put it into standard form, right, major premise, minor premise, and conclusion, and we get at its universal form, no M or P, all S or M, no S or P, we could list the types of statements these are. No horned animals are predators is in E, all moose are horned animals is in A, and no moose are predators is in E. Now when we list the letters in orders of major premise, minor premise, and conclusion, we have the mood of a syllogism. So this syllogism is called a syllogism of the mood, E-A-E. Now syllogisms not only have different moods, but they can have what Aristotle called figures, right? So here's our syllogism that we looked at, our EAE, which has this universal form, or what Aristotle called a schema. And we're going to learn that the position of the middle term in the premises is called the figure of the syllogism. And here's our two middle terms. Now if we think about the possible combinations of middle terms we could have, we'll end up with four possible situations. We'll have a figure 1 where the middle term comes first, while in the minor premise it comes second. We could have a figure where the middle term comes in the predicate position in both propositions. We could have a possibility that the middle term comes in the subject positions in both propositions. And then we could have the possibility that the middle term could be in the predicate term, in the major term, and in the subject term, in the minor term. So the middle term in the two premises can be arranged in any one of four different ways, which we call the figures. You just have to memorize the diagram, right? Maybe memorizing this one will help you the most, or maybe this one. Right? Some people claim this sort of looks like a shirt collar, if that helps you to visualize it. But in any case, you should be able to recapitulate this diagram. And I will, in fact, on the exam, ask you to fill this out. So you have to memorize it. And here are some examples, right? All P or M, all S or M, all S or P. If we look at the middle terms, that's a figure 2. All M or P, some S or M, all S or P. Here we have a figure 1. Some P are not M, no M or S. So some S are not P. There's our middle terms. That gives us a figure 4. And no M or P, no M or S, some S are not P. And that gives us a figure 3. So given a syllogism in standard form, its figure is determined as follows. In figure 1, the middle term is the subject term of the major premise and the predicate term of the minor premise. In figure 2, the middle term is the predicate term in both premises. In figure 3, the middle term is the subject term in both premises. And in figure 4, the middle term is in the predicate term in the major premise and in the subject term in the minor premise. Now, you could be asked to determine the form of a syllogism. And the following procedure gives us a way to identify any argument form. So I'm going to give you the overview. We'll go through the whole procedure, and then I'm going to break it down step by step and show you how it's done. The first thing you want to do is put all statements into standard form. It has to be in A, I, E, or O. Second, you want to identify the conclusion and place it on the third line. Third, you want to identify the premise which has the subject term of the conclusion and place it on the second line, giving us the minor premise. And 4, identify the premise which has the predicate term of the conclusion and place it on the first line, giving us the major premise. You then want to identify the mood by determining the form of the premises in the conclusion and write them down in the order of major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. And 6, you want to identify the figure by using the location of the middle term in the premises, first, second, third, or fourth, and write it down after the mood. Now this sounds a little complicated, but once you start doing it and practicing it, it's not going to be that difficult. So, consider the following example. We come across this argument out in the wildlands. It's a wild argument we've trapped. A U.S. president is not a socialist because all U.S. presidents support Wall Street, and a socialist is not a Wall Street reporter. In fact, it's hard to think of any politician in America who's a socialist. Not even Bernie Sanders is a socialist, right? So ignore all the stupid remarks you've heard about Bernie Sanders. In Europe, he'd be considered a middle-of-the-road politician. Right? Well, anyway, first thing you do is put all statements into standard form. So if we translate this, it becomes no U.S. presidents are socialists because all U.S. presidents are Wall Street reporters, and no socialists are Wall Street reporters. Notice how we had to change this one to put it into standard form. So we identify the conclusion and place it on the third line, right? And here the because indicates these are premises, so there's our conclusion. No U.S. presidents are socialists. We now want to identify the premise which has the subject term of the conclusion and place it on the second line, giving us the minor premise, because the subject term of the conclusion, remember, is the minor term. No U.S. presidents are socialists because all U.S. presidents are Wall Street supporters, and no socialists are Wall Street reporters. So there we have the subject term of the conclusion, right? U.S. presidents, so it becomes our minor premise. All U.S. presidents are Wall Street supporters. We now want to identify the premise which has the predicate term of the conclusion and place it on the first line, which would give us the minor premise. Right? So here's the predicate term of the conclusion, socialist. And if we go looking, right, there's our conclusion up there. There's socialists. This premise, no socialists are Wall Street reporters. And we put it right there. So we have major term, minor term, and conclusion. We now can identify the mood by determining the form of the premises and its conclusion, and we could write them down in the order of major premise, minor premise, conclusion. This is an EAE, right? And of course, you could just do this in your head, but it's helpful to write it down so you don't screw anything up. You want to identify the figure by using the location of the middle term in the premises and write it down after the mood, right? So if we put it into universal form, we have no P or M, all S or M, all S or P. Here we see both middle terms are in the predicate position, and that makes it a figure 2. So we went through all that to be able to say, this is an EAE2 syllogism. Okay. Now let's consider another example. Take this argument I've found in the wild. In the wilds of my own mind, actually. Since every oppressor of the poor is a follower of the dark side of the force, and every follower of the dark side of the force is not a Jedi, it follows that no Jedi is an oppressor of the poor. So first we want to put all the statements into standard form. Let's consider this first one because it's not in standard form. Every oppressor of the poor is a follower of the dark side of the force becomes all oppressors of the poor are followers of the dark side of the Force. Every follower of the dark side of the Force is not a Jedi becomes no followers of the dark side of the Force are Jedi. And finally, no Jedi is an oppressor of the poor becomes no Jedi are oppressors of the poor. And pay attention to this one statement we had to translate. You want to remember what we talked about when we studied translation, right? If we say something like, every follower of the dark side of the Force is not a Jedi, it becomes all followers of the dark side of the Force is not a Jedi, but that's not in standard form, because all S or not P is not an A, I, E, or O. So remember, all S or not P becomes no S or P, or no followers of the dark side of the Force are Jedi. Now this also shows you how you just have to get translation down. On exams, I'll give you a wild argument, and then you have to translate it. You have to before you do anything else. So we can label our subject and predicate, and then label them here, and that gives us our middle term, and that gives us the form. No M or S, all P or M. No S is P. We see here the middle term is like this. So that means it's a figure 1. So we have an EAE1 syllogism. A syllogism in the mood of EAE in the first figure. Now we also need to be able to work backwards. By that I mean, say on an exam, or just in the wild when you find one, you could be dealing with an AII3 syllogism. But what's that, you ask? Well, you can start with the figure and write out the positions of the 3 terms, and then fill in the blanks, essentially, using the mood, right? So if it's a figure 3, it would have to look like this, MP, MS, SP, and if it's an AII, all M are P, some M are S, and some S are P. So on an exam, I could ask you to put each of the following arguments into standard form and identify its mood and figure. So here's the example. Problem. It follows that a few mammals are not brown, because it is false that some mammals are fish, and a few fish are brown-colored things. Well, that's obviously the conclusion. It follows that, and what comes after the because gives us the premises, but first we want to translate it. Some mammals are not brown-colored things, because no mammals are fish, and some fish are brown-colored things. And then we put it into standard form, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. Some fish are brown-colored things, no mammals are fish, some mammals are not brown-colored things. Right? And that would give us MP, SM, SP, and that would be an IEO1. And that's how you do that. Or on an exam, I could give you the following problem. Given the following moods and figures, determine the type of syllogism it describes. And so I would have on the exam AE4. So what type of syllogism is that? Well, it's one that would have the form all P or M, all M or S, and all S or P. Now, within each of the 4 figures, a syllogism could have any mood. So any mood describes 4 different syllogisms, one in each figure. So a syllogism of mood AAA, for example, could be found in figure 1, 2, 3, or 4. So to indicate a syllogism fully, we give its mood and figure. In each one, note that the middle term serves as a link between the major and minor terms. In everyday reasoning, the different figures are typically used to describe different links or ways of joining together classes, categories, or sets. Ways of gathering and comparing what is same and what is different. Remember, a syllogism is a gathering of thought. Let's think about the different figures and what they show us. So consider our first syllogism here. All mammals are lung breathers. All whales are animals. So all whales are lung breathers. Well, that's an AAA1 syllogism, right? And the first figure is a natural way to express a common species-genus relationship. Now, I assume you all remember species, and genus as levels of logical abstraction, but a brief review won't hurt us. So, if we're thinking about whales, for example, we have the actual existing whale, like say that whale Willie in that movie Free Willy, or some whale named Seamus who was held captive at SeaWorld, the actual whale that swims around in the water, right? So that's the particular or the referent. And then we could say whale is the concept, right, the class of that thing to which Willie or Seamus belongs. And then remember, we could say a whale is a type of mammal, which would mean that whale is entirely included in the class of mammal, and whale is the species, and mammal is the genus. And then we could say, and a mammal is a type of animal, and so then mammal would be species to the genus animal, and so forth. Okay. Now remember what I've said about listening to the logos. To reason is to be able to pick things up and lay them side by side so as to compare them, seeing what is same and what is different, to classify them, to give an account, and hold that account in memory, and to recount and tell it again. The human creature is the living being that has the ability to reason, to listen to the logos. Well, a first-figure syllogism is a tool for thinking in just this way. So in our whale syllogism here, we infer that whales have a certain property. They breathe by means of lungs, because they're included in the genus class of mammals that have that same property, right? Whales are included in the class of lung breathers. Mammals are lung breathers. Whales are mammals. And in this one, right, no horned animals are predators. All moose are horned animals. No moose are predators. In the moose syllogism, the minor term moose is species to middle term genus horned animal, which is entirely excluded from the major term predator. And so moose, as included in horned animal, must be excluded from it too. While in this one, right, the minor term whale is species to the middle term genus mammal, and the middle term mammal is in turn species to a broader genus, the major term lung breather. Now in second figure syllogisms, the middle term is in the predicate position in both the major premise and the minor premise, right? Here we have no Marxists or advocates of private property. All capitalists are advocates of private property, so no capitalists or Marxists. And the middle term is private property. Now here we're looking for class exclusion, right? We're trying to think about which category is contained in which category and which category it's not contained in. Right? So we want to see whether there's some genus middle term, some class middle term, that one belongs to and the other does not, looking for class exclusion. So notice that the minor term capitalist is a species of the middle term genus or broader concept advocates of private property, while the major term Marxist is a class entirely excluded from that middle term class. So second figure reasoning is based on class exclusion. Right? Now, suppose we were wondering if any work of music that has a real genius to it had been made in the genre of rock and roll. Well, we might think of the late great Chuck Berry, and listening to the logos, we could reason as we've done on the board here, right? Every Chuck Berry song is a rock and roll song. Some Chuck Berry song is a work of genius. Now, remember, some means at least one, but maybe more. And actually, there's quite a few Chuck Berry songs that are works of genius. Almost said Jesus. Yeah, Chuck Berry is a rock and roll Jesus. But in any case, just think of Roll Over Beethoven or Johnny B. Goode, right? Johnny B. Goode is clearly a work of genius. So there's at least one work of genius that's a rock and roll song, right? And that's in AII 3. Now, here you want to note the relationship amongst genus and species, as well as the minor, major, and middle term. And note also here that the middle terms are both in the subject class, right? Okay. Now, fourth figure syllogisms are kind of weird, right? Strange sounding. And if you think about it, a fourth figure syllogism is the mirror image of the first figure in terms of the placement of the middle term. And it's the first figure syllogism that seems most natural to us. So I guess it makes sense that a fourth figure syllogism might seem kind of twisty and strange and unnatural, as they are so rarely used in everyday speech. And here's an example of one in IAI 4. Some pitchers are good hitters. All good hitters are potential pinch hitters. So some potential pinch hitters are pitchers. Now, of course, this only holds true of the National League, which is the only baseball league worth considering, since they don't have that awful thing known as the designated hitter. And when I designed this, I was thinking about some heroes of mine from back in the day when I was in grad school in Atlanta, Georgia, because there are two pitchers who played on the Atlanta Braves. Tom Glavine, right here, and Greg Maddux, right here. And they were not only good pitchers, but they were good hitters. So sometimes that great manager of the Braves at that time, Bobby Cox, would use them as pinch hitters, which is almost unheard of, right? So, go Braves. I tell you, it was a great day back in the day when I was in grad school, and they won the World Series. Now, why is all of this important, besides getting a good grade on my exam? Well, the validity of a syllogism depends entirely on its form. Remember, we're dealing with a formal system. And we also know that some combinations of mood and figure are valid forms. So if we can identify the mood and figure of a syllogism, we have a handy way to identify a valid syllogism. And if we have a valid syllogism, we have something we can depend on, because we can know for sure that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true also. So, thank you for your kind attention. We'll be talking more about syllogisms and how to tell whether they are valid or not in our next episode. Same bat time, same bat channel.